see that there's quorum, and we have our witnesses in place. And I want to welcome you all back after the break, but particularly I want to welcome our clerk back. We are very pleased. In your absence, Andrew, the committee almost derailed, but fortunately your substitutes were quite helpful, and we are very pleased to see you back.
Thank you.
With that, I want to call our witnesses in no particular order. I'll leave them to decide who goes first, and you all know the drill because you've all been here many times before. So with that, I'll ask whoever's the lead.
I have an opening statement.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we are honored to once again appear before you. I'm Major General Greg Smith, Director General International Security Policy. I'm joined by my colleague, Major General Paul Prévost, Director of Staff for the Strategic Joint Staff, in addition to my two GAC colleagues, Amanda Strohan and Jenny Chen. Thank you for this opportunity to continue our discussion with the committee on the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces efforts to help implement the government's Indo-Pacific strategy. Malgré un environnement de sécurité mondiale difficile, l'Indo-Pacific demeure.
Despite a challenging global security environment, the Indo-Pacific remains a priority for the defense team. We have continued to move aggressively to implement the Indo-Pacific strategy. In 2023, we delivered on all our stated strategic objectives and look forward to building on these successes in 2024.
Increased our defense presence in the region, allowing for more engagement, cooperation, and collaboration. This includes increased security cooperation with partners and expanded engagement through regional training, multilateral exercises, and events. From deploying our 3rd Royal Canadian Navy warship to engaging in large-scale strategic multilateral exercises in the region for the first time, to expanding our defense relations with priority countries, national defense has delivered. En 2024, l'effort principal de l'équipe.
The defense team's main effort in 2024 will be maintaining and, where possible, increasing active and meaningful operational contributions to the region on a sustainable and enduring basis. This will be critical in demonstrating that Canada is a reliable partner to the region and a net contributor to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Horizon will be the primary vehicle for delivering the defense lines of effort in the Indo-Pacific strategy, capturing operations, existing and new exercises, and activities from all elements of the Canadian Armed Forces, including capacity-building programs. Through Operation Neon, we will also continue monitoring United Nations Security Council resolutions against North Korea as we maintain our long-standing support to the United Nations Command and for the importance of denuclearization and the promotion of peace on the Korean Peninsula. As part of this commitment, in December 2023, Canada increased the Canadian Armed Forces footprint within the United Nations Command, including assuming the position of Deputy Commander, United Nations Command. Together, these operations will directly support the promotion of peace, resilience, and stability in the region, and help uphold the rules-based international system. L'équipe de la défense continuera également de favoriser les relations.
The defense team will also continue to foster defense relations with key regional partners and communicate our defense and foreign policy interests, as well as highlighting Canada's significant contributions to the collective effort of promoting peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Last week, a defense delegation visited the region for defense policy talks to deepen relationships with partner nations and hear from them how Canada can become a better and more trusted defense and security partner. These talks resulted in concrete deliverables, advancing relationships one step at a time. As an example, we signed a Defense Cooperation Memorandum of Understanding with the Philippines, establishing a framework that will significantly enhance the level of cooperation and type of activities between our forces. As well, during the Canada-Vietnam Defense Policy Dialogue held in the fall, we signed a United Nations Peacekeeping Cooperation Memorandum of Understanding, allowing our forces to share expertise and support training effort through Vietnam's Peacekeeping Training Center. As we head into the second year of the Indo-Pacific strategy, the defense team will continue to promote and share our key accomplishments, as well as the vast array of activities and strategic impact that Canada delivers in the region to support our shared interests with partners. In sum, The Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces will continue to deliver a meaningful and multifaceted regional presence for Canada from which we can promote peace and stability in support of our national interests and values. Je serai maintenant heureux de répondre.
I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're ready for questions. Does Global have any opening statement?
We don't have an opening statement, but perhaps we'll introduce ourselves if you're all right with that.
Yes.
My name is Amanda Strahan. I'm the Director General for Indo-Pacific Strategic Planning, Policy and Operations, and I am joined by my colleague.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Chen, Executive Director for our Greater China Political Division at Global Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. And we know Major General Prevost. Yeah. With that, Ms. Gallant, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reportedly, top Chinese and U.S. officials held candid talks in Bangkok aimed at lowering tensions between the superpowers on Taiwan and other subjects. How realistic is it that an invasion of Taiwan will be avoided? And what military assets does Canada have to do our part should it become necessary?
I can start, Mr. Chair. I think the important thing is the Indo-Pacific strategy, I think, establishes deterrence. We have a presence in the region. We're doing Taiwan Strait transits. We're doing exercises. So we're showing ourselves as a regional partner. I think all of that sends a tone in the region that we're present. Canada's not the biggest player there, but we're a willing and able partner in the region. And I think that helps create an overall environment in the area to say that we're present and it's important.
So should a conflict erupt, what can Canada actually provide in terms of firepower or evacuations? How are we set up to do the part of the plan that maybe we may be called on to do?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and maybe my ops colleague wants to join me on this one. We're trying to prevent that. That's what the Indo-Pacific strategy is about, is creating an overall deterrence. I like to call it a rules-based international order presence. It establishes the ideas that we must follow the guidelines of how we act in the world internationally. But I'd say beyond that, we're working very closely with our allies and partners to try to prevent these type of, to prevent such a threat.
Prevention is certainly worth a pound of cure, but our job is to protect Canadians and the region in the worst case scenario. So what assets do we have in place? What plans do we have in place should the worst case scenario come to pass?
Mr. Chair, I'd start by saying we're planning with our allies and our partners, but we hope that never happens. Beyond that, I think we've already talked about some of the presence we have there with the 3 ships that go into the region periodically or throughout the year. And beyond that, we're increasing our Army, Air Force, Special Forces, cyber presence throughout to try to prevent that happening.
Okay, so let's move a bit north. North Korea fired several cruise missiles in waters off its east coast yesterday, and nuclear-capable cruise missiles were test-fired last week. Is this the usual saber rattling over Western naval exercises in the region around this time of year? And if not, how is Canada prepared to protect our residents from potential collateral damage should missiles enter our airspace?
I'll start off. I'll see if my colleagues want to join in. But essentially, I've talked about OpNeon. OpNeon is designed to try to do sanctions monitoring. We have a continuous presence there. It's episodic. But again, it helps set the tone in the region to say we're monitoring what's happening and trying to prevent any type of conflict to continue. Again, it's not going to prevent the firing of missiles, but it does show continuous presence, and we're a big player as far as that goes.
So if the missiles are launched, what type of air defense does Canada have in place to protect our residents?
Mr. Chair, I just asked a question. The residents of
Canada. The residents, our Canadian citizens in South Korea, will be the next question.
Okay. So if we're talking about ground-based air defense, we don't have any ground-based air defense in on the BC coast or anything like that. But that's why we have an Indo-Pacific strategy. That's why we do OpNeon, is try to prevent these type of things. Continuous presence to create deterrence, if you will.
Okay, so many people in my community have a son or daughter in South Korea teaching or living permanently, and I know it's on their minds all the time. Whenever the saber-rattling happens, at what point do we start making plans to get them out of there? What is the signal? What if you had a family of your own in South Korea, when would you tell them to get out?
Okay, so Mr. Chair, again, I'll see if any of my colleagues want to jump in here. We have non-combatant evacuation operations contingency plans for all kinds of regions throughout the world. We've done it recently in the Sudan. We've done it recently or prepared for it in Lebanon, Israel. So we're prepared and can do those type of things. That being said, how can we set the conditions that the situation will never occur? That's by the kind of presence we're creating right now. And I'm talking militarily. Clearly, we have other trade, people-to-people connections, a lot of other activities that will try to lower the temperature there to prevent that from happening.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Major General Priveau. At what point do Canadians know it's time to start making plans to get our families out of South Korea?
Mr. Chair, actually, the answer to this question lies into global affairs as they're responsible for consular cases, so I'll refer to my...
Sure. So let me, first of all, say that we have condemned the missile launches consistently, and again, agree with my colleagues that sanctions are an extremely important part of the deterrence to ensure that we don't arrive at a situation of conflict in the region, and we would appeal for calm and for stability and security. With respect to Canadian citizens in the region, Canadian citizens, as we have in many parts of the world, Global Affairs Canada has a branch that is responsible for planning for contingencies, and we do that around the world in coordination with our national defence colleagues and partners across government. We have plans in place for the region, much as we do in the rest of the world, and we have travel advisories which are reviewed on a regular basis for countries across the region. Canadians are encouraged to follow those travel advisories. Canadians living in the region are encouraged to register with us and to follow our travel advisories for the most up-to-date information on security threats in the region.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Mr. Fisher, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, folks, for being here. I hope you had a great New Year and got a little bit of a break and some time to spend with family members. I'm interested in what has happened in the global landscape, the global environment, since we launched our Indo strategy. We've got the war in Ukraine. We've got the conflict in the Middle East. There's obviously going to be, and justifiably so, a shift in the international community's focus. How has that impacted the recent launching of the strategy? How has that impacted the important work that you're doing? And how has that impacted relationships with our partners in the Indo-Pacific?
Would you like to start?
So indeed, the Indo-Pacific strategy recognizes the importance of the region in an increasingly complex world. And I think it is fair to say that the geopolitical situation around the world has become increasingly complex since the strategy was launched just over a year ago. I think what that tells us is that we were timely in launching a strategy, and the framework of the strategy remains sound. So the strategy is built around 5 strategic pillars of things, or strategic objectives, which we consider to be Canada's priorities in the region: peace, security and stability, trade and economic prosperity, preserving the planet, protecting the planet, investing in and connecting people, and engaging in the region, being a reliable partner. Partners in the region are increasingly important to us as the world becomes more unstable, and that framework continues to be valid. We, of course, over time will continue to tactically recalibrate as we look at a strategy that will extend over 5 to 10 years. But the framework of the strategy and the principles on which it is based are still valid a year in, and they will continue to be valid as the strategy moves forward.
You talk about one of the pillars being economic and one of the pillars being trade. I see those as, that particular pillar as being something that must have been heavily impacted by the things I just outlined.
Indeed, and again, I think it speaks to why the strategy is increasingly important. And in fact, trade and the economic pillar of the strategy have been very active in the first year of implementation. So if you look at some of the activities that we've conducted over the last year, we have our Trade Canada Team Canada trade missions, which have started in the first year of the strategy, with the first full-scale mission taking place in October. There are another 4 coming up in the next months of Team Canada trade missions. We're opening an agriculture and agri-food office in Manila. Export Development Canada is also expanding their presence in the region to 2 additional locations. We've named and posted a senior trade representative in Jakarta. We've put more money out the door in the Can Export facility for Canadian exporters in the region. There's a lot of activity that's happening on the trade and economic front to uphold this strategic objective of the strategy.
Okay, thank you for that. Sticking with recent tensions that have cropped up since we've launched the strategy, what about the tensions between the governments of Canada and India? How have they impacted our ties and relationships in the Indo-Pacific region?
So I'll take that question as well. In the context of the Indo-Pacific strategy, what I would say is that this is a strategy, as I said, over 5 years, renewable for another 5 years. So it is a 10-year strategy, and we are focused in the IPS on our long-term relationships in the region. We know that India will continue to be an important partner in that, and we recognize that there will be ebbs and flows with respect to bilateral relations with many countries in the region over the course of the 10-year time horizon of the strategy. And so we're prepared for that. We think that, again, that the principles of the strategy remain valid. With respect to specific bilateral relations with any country, I would refer those to my colleagues potentially before the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs. But with respect to the Indo-Pacific strategy, we think the strategy framework continues to hold, and in fact, it was designed specifically to help us to navigate complications in the region over the course of 10 years.
Thank you. Major General Smith, during your opening remarks, you talked about a defense delegation that was working with partners on how we can become a better defense partner. Obviously, you only had 5 minutes. Can you just fill us in a little bit on what kind of conversation that was? I assume that we're seen as being a good partner in defense around the world, and I'm interested in your thoughts on who might have said that we could do better and what we could do better.
Mr. Chair, I was fortunate to go to the region. I guess I got back late last week with my boss and participated in what's known as the Shangri-La Dialogue Sherpa event, which is a regional security forum. It's named after the hotel. It's nothing exciting. All that to say is we had multiple bilats with partners throughout the region who said, yep, you're present. You've been doing good things, but it's a year in. And so I don't want to be too self-celebratory up here and say that we've resolved this. We're now a year in, and from a defense perspective, we're starting to build on relationships. I talked about the visit with the Philippines, Vietnam. I went to Cambodia, just starting relationships with the countries that are important, particularly for ASEAN. So I think we're building upon these relationships and also looking for opportunities across the 5 pillars of defense. So yes, we want to have ships, visit as much as possible. Where can we do exercises? How about capacity building, including women, peace, and security, maybe some cyber, looking for those opportunities. So I would say we're doing well after the first year, but we're going to continue to build on those.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci aux panélistes.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. It's a pleasure to see you. I have a few questions on AUKUS. We know that the Government of Canada is not going to be joining the submarine or nuclear side of that, but there is an interest in AI, cybersecurity, et cetera. Could you give us an overview of that and where we're at with that? And if Canada were to be interested in joining on the cybersecurity front, really, it's not so much what we can get out of that group that seems to matter, but what we can give to it. In a previous study, we saw under supplies that deadlines are very long. What we are able to manage to get in terms of cybersecurity information seems to be out of date. Is there anything we can do to bring something interesting to the table, even if it means perhaps we look at the supply of cybersecurity in a more specific way? Mr. Chair, I'll start, but cyber goes beyond defense. That's a good question. We have AUKUS. There's the nuclear submarine side, and of course Canada does not engage in that, but we are prepared to contribute on the second pillar, and we expect to, and we When it comes to these 5 pillars in the Indo-Pacific strategy, we are already doing certain things in this area. There are important things that we're doing. In the meantime, there are other groups. ASEAN is a very important group, and we're doing great work with them. And then there's Asian Defense Ministers Plus. Also, we're working with that group, and that's our focus at this point. Anything to add? I would add this. Cybersecurity is not only a matter for national defense. There are other departments and other government agencies that are involved.
There is indeed an initiative for cybersecurity and cyber diplomacy, and that initiative is well underway with partners. And some of the activities that have taken place already in the course of the first year of the strategy, we convened like-minded partners, including some from the region, in June in Vancouver to talk about threats emanating from the region. And the strategy, we participated in the Singapore International Cyber Week in October and the ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Cybersecurity with partners in October. So we've been very active in the front of cyber diplomacy and cybersecurity. And the Indo-Pacific strategy aims, on one hand, to reinforce our own capacity to anticipate and cope with threats emanating from the region, but also to help partners in the region to improve their capacity to predict and cope with cybersecurity threats.
Merci. Ben, peut-être pour préciser un peu ma question.
Perhaps to be a bit more specific in my question, perhaps you were expecting to be invited to AUKUS, but in order for that to happen, we have to be attractive to it. Is there a strategy that we are putting forward so that really it's just unavoidable for Canada to be invited in? Materially speaking, is there a strategy in place to be more higher performing and more attractive? I'll start, Mr. Chair. Of course, AUKUS is 3 countries. We have excellent relationships with these countries, the UK, the US, and things are going very well. So we're continuing to advance in that area. As you mentioned in your question, we have many resources. We are working with these allies to really put forward our strengths in some areas of technology, and of course, we are there.
Merci. Peut-être une question.
Thank you. A question for GAC, actually. There is a cooperation defense agreement with the Philippines that is underway, but at the same time, we're seeing that Philippines may have just supported China with troops. These Indo-Pacific countries seem to have a foot on each side of the fence, if you will, and an interest in that they have to protect. How do you strike a balance between bilateralism and multilateralism in this context? And are things evolving in one direction or the other, given the situation as we can see today?
I think it's fair to say the Indo-Pacific strategy anticipates engagement both on the multilateral and on the bilateral front, and so we're very active in both. And I think you raise an important point, Mr. Chair. It's an important point to say that there are varying interests in the region and competing interests. We are there to protect Canada's national interest. And I think that really outlines why it is so important that we be there and that we engage with all partners across the region, because there are competing narratives, competing interests, and it is important that Canada engage. The Indo-Pacific strategy invests $2.3 billion in 24 initiatives that are to be implemented by 17 government departments and agencies. It demonstrates a seriousness and an engagement with respect to the region. It's important that we be there. That has been well received by countries in the region. It's important that we be there because we need to defend Canadian interests, and there are competing narratives on the ground. So by bringing what we bring with the Indo-Pacific strategy, we're there to demonstrate to partners that it's worth working with us, and we will continue to advocate for Canadian interests in that crowded space.
15 seconds. Ms. Matheson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of some of the details with trade on the Indo-Pacific strategy, so Canada is now the chair of the CPTPP. Now, it was sold as this grand progressive partnership. However, it seemed to be in name only. We've traded off about 58,000 Canadian jobs, put damaged supply managed sectors, sold off parts in terms of our auto industry, and the trade-off seems to be recently. It was reported a 0.082 increase to our GDP by 2035. So, can you give us an update in terms of the numbers in terms of that? If that's changed, if we're seeing any actual grand growth from this trade partnership?
Generally, I don't interfere in members' questions, which are perfectly legitimate. That strikes me as a question for another committee. But still, there may be security implications, and if you could focus on that part, please.
Well, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy, a large part of that is trade. So, I don't see.
Fair enough. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So let me speak to that in general terms, because I don't have the specific data to address in detail on these issues. But what I will say is that we're a trading nation, and our market access that we have under our various trade agreements is world leading. And Canadian businesses are benefiting from that. And the Indo-Pacific strategy recognizes that this region in particular will be important for Canadian prosperity in the future. We recognize that the global middle class will be increasingly concentrated in the Indo-Pacific region, that they will play an increasingly important role in supply chains. And so we can anticipate that now and in the future, if we're not there, that we will miss out on opportunities. It's a crowded space. And so that is why the Indo-Pacific strategy anticipates the need to engage in a commercial sense in the region.
It's interesting you talk about the global middle class, but ultimately a lot of these trade agreements will have suffer people within the working class. Certainly in terms of that progressive side that was supposed to be, there are no major labor provisions. We're trading with countries potentially that have quite significant human rights abuses. There's no chapter on gender rights, Indigenous rights. So, in terms of those standards that Canada is supposed to put forward, that battle for we continue to hear about the international world order and human rights as a part of that. Are we seeing that actually out of the CPTPP?
So again, I can't speak specifically to the CPTPP. I'm not a trade policy expert or a trade negotiator, but what I can say is happening under the Indo-Pacific strategy. There are a couple of things where we invested money in the Indo-Pacific strategy. One is under labor standards. So there is a provision within the Indo-Pacific strategy to provide capacity building for countries within the Indo-Pacific region to meet the labor standards set out in international trade agreements. So that's something that we're doing. We also have signed the Plan of Action Trust Fund with ASEAN to fund the participation of ASEAN members in free trade negotiations between Canada and ASEAN. So there are things that we are doing within the Indo-Pacific strategy to help countries in the region improve their standards. We also have within the Indo-Pacific strategy provisions to increase our development assistance. So we have money that is designated to improve democracy and human rights in the region. So the strategy, it does have 5 strategic objectives, and it covers areas included under human rights and democracy, and we'll continue to defend those things and try to improve the situation.
Well, and that's very interesting as well, because China has applied to join. It seems as though they may be given membership. How does that now work in terms of that increasing of democracy and again those human rights and labor standards? How does that now factor into what may be that expanded CPTPP?
So I can't speak specifically to CPTPP or the potential for expansion of CPTPP. I'm not sure if my colleague has any comments with respect to China specifically, but really we're not in a position to speak to the CPTPP specifically.
I can just add something.
Go ahead. Yes, absolutely.
Just to say, so in terms of accession for CPTPP, of course, yes, China has applied to join CPTPP as the chair of CPTPP this year. Canada has not yet. is still working through the various processes and procedures with other members of CPTPP. It is a consensus-driven organization, so we have to work together with all the other members to plan that pathway forward. Yes, still under consideration.
And then in terms of, I'll shift to our D&D folks. I don't know how much time I have left.
30 seconds.
So with all of these increasing pressures in terms of what's going on in the region, we have a retention recruitment crisis. How are we managing that in terms of our numbers?
Mr. Chair, IPS actually tells us what to do. It's great. It gives us the resources to do it. And we're fairly confident we'll continue to do that across the 5 lines of effort. So I have good confidence we'll continue to do that. Outside of, as the question said, there's lots of pressures around the world, but we've got the resources and the direction to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. So, Mr. Bazan, before you begin, you got to say CPTPP 3 times. Yeah,
Drinking game.
5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome all our witnesses. Good to see both our General Smith and General Prevost back at committee, and our colleagues from Global Affairs. We're talking about Operation Horizon and freedom of navigation, particularly in the Strait of Taiwan. So trying to see how many frigates do we currently have deployed at the moment on this operation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now we have no frigates deployed in the region on their upper horizon, but one will sail shortly. The strategy calls for 3 ships to be deployed every year, and that's our intent for 2024 is to have 3 ships in the region.
How long is those deployments?
I'm sorry?
How long are they deployed at a time?
Each ship will be deploying for about 6 months.
6 months. So there will be overlap. There'll be 2 ships at times in.
Correctly. So one will sail from the East Coast shortly to go the long way around to the Asia Pacific, and the other 2 ships from the West Coast will be follow on this summer.
Okay, and how about our AOR supply ship, the Asterix? Has it been deployed, and will it be deployed again?
So, Mr. Chair, so we're still working on the final plan there. We'll inform the committee once we have it. But
Okay.
the Montreal is set to sail shortly.
Okay, thank you. When we look at the recent election in Taiwan and increased provocative actions taken by the PLA Navy as well as the PLA Air Force over the Strait of Taiwan and around the island of Taiwan, have we encountered, when we've been sailing our frigates doing freedom of navigation to sea, any hostile actions by the PLA against our assets?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that one again. I wouldn't say hostile actions, but we're concerned about the way the PLAN has been acting around our ships and so around our aircraft. So no hostile action, but I would
the cyclones as well, right?
I'm sorry.
Our cyclones have had some run-ins, so you might say.
That is correct, and we're concerned about the behavior. It's totally in China's rights to intercept our military assets in the region, international waters. At the same time, we're concerned about the way it's going about, and we're having good discussions with China to try to professionalize the intercepts.
Would you describe their actions and interactions with the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force as careless?
I would say it's of concern for sure. Careless is probably a good term, Mr. Chair.
Going to Operation Neon, North Korea, we witnessed, as Ms. Gallant was talking about, both the testing of cruise missiles, which they haven't had that capability until recently, firing that into waters near South Korea, as well as the very recent rocket launch and satellites that were put into orbit, definitely giving them more reach with ballistic missiles. How big a concern is that to Canadian Armed Forces in protecting our own airspace, but also protecting the region?
Mr. Chair, of concern. We're obviously following every time North Korea launches something. Our intelligence folks spend quite some time on studying what's going on there. So it is of concern for the region, obviously. But this is also why we do have the Indo-Pacific strategy here to bring stability and security in the region, ensure presence with allies to make sure we deter as much as possible those actions.
I would hope that with our allies and as we look at the increasing threats, both in also the South China Sea, the East Thomas Shoal, and the interaction between the PLA Navy and the Philippine Coast Guard, that we would do more in working together and ensuring that there is proper defenses in place like we're doing in NATO along the eastern flank. Mr. Chair, with the time I have left, I want to move a motion that I gave notice of. Okay. Just to move that, given the testimony from witnesses at the Nova Scotia Legislature Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, which repudiated denials from the Department of National Defense regarding military homelessness, and that given that there is widespread and incontrovertible evidence that after 8 years of Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, our military members can't afford food or housing, the committee invites the Minister of Housing, the Executive Director of the Royal Canadian Legion Nova Scotia Nunavut Command, the Director of Emergency Management for the Halifax Regional Municipality, and the Executive Director of the Halifax and Region Military Family Resource Center to answer questions on the military housing crisis. Now, Mr. Chair, I'm sure that over the holidays, members saw the stories in the Halifax Chronicle. About the first one came on December 21st. There was a hearing done at the Nova Scotia Legislature on unhoused members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And that this is, in my mind, a travesty that is happening. It's unfortunate that our serving military heroes have been forced to live in tents and use food banks. We had a number of different quotes in here from Craig Hood, who is the Executive Director of the Royal Canadian Legion, talking about couch surfing, living rough in tents, living in their vehicles, entering into unsafe relationships to secure housing at risk of even domestic violence. He described this as a serious incident or an epidemic, and that needs to be tackled. So that was from Craig Hood, and Ryan Taplin, who's a 33-year-old military veteran, is also there talking about the need for more, using more benevolent funds in the Legion to support current serving members. This is unheard of. Erica Fleck, who's Director of Emergency Management for the Halifax Regional Municipality, said that she's also identified an increase in the number of active duty members who are unhoused and who have only precarious housing. So this speaks to the housing crisis in Halifax and region. I was hoping that we'd have had a 106.4 emergency meeting on this to discuss having the expansion to our current housing study and having these extra witnesses invited. I think 4 meetings is not enough to tackle this issue, knowing the crisis that's out there, especially when literally members of the Canadian Armed Forces are living in the cold and have been left out there. I reached out to both our Bloc and NDP colleagues and unfortunately couldn't get them to sign on to a 106.4. But I am hopeful that they would support expanding the study and inviting these witnesses, along with the Minister of Housing. Minister Fraser, this is his backyard. He represents Nova Scotia, and I would hope that as the Minister of Housing, he would be able to talk about how he's addressing this crisis in Nova Scotia and elsewhere that's impacting upon the Canadian Armed Forces. I also would hope that Mr. Fillmore and Mr. Fisher, who have the CFB Halifax as well as 12-wing Shearwater in their ridings, would also be supportive of this to ensure that we address this issue in an expeditious manner so that we can ensure that those that are serving us, that are making, we ask them to sacrifice a lot in operations. We aren't asking them to live on the streets while they're in service to Canada. So with that, Mr. Chair, I hope that we can support this
Thank
motion.
you, Mr. Brizan. The motion is in order, and when notice is properly done. Given that this may be a matter of some debate, can I release the witnesses? It's kind of unfortunate. It's very difficult to get all witnesses together in one place at one time, and this is a bit of a unfortunate situation. So I'm anticipating that it will occupy the balance of the time that we've designated for this meeting. So can I release the witnesses?
Unless we vote.
I would be, point of order, if I may, in response to your question. I mean, if it's the will, if there is no debate and we would go straight to a vote, we would have time for witnesses.
I already have 2 people that want to debate it. So
I'll come off if everybody else does.
I see. I'm looking for consensus here.
No, okay.
We should release them or should?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for, yeah. Yeah, on this point of order as to whether I release the witnesses?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, Mr. Chair, with all due respect to my great colleagues, is that we do have witnesses today. I think we understand, and actually it is a motion on housing that you brought forward that actually derailed at some of the calendars that was established last year, and we completely agree all together. No, but we agree to go on housing, like the importance of housing on base, and I'm not disputing this. What I would say is that could we look?
It is a point of order. The point of order is, may I release the witnesses under the circumstances, not as to the merits of the motion?
No.
So I can't release the witnesses?
Mr. Chair, I would like to have the floor, if you may allow me to explain why I think we should possibly keep our witnesses to continue on this very important topic while still looking how we can agree as a consensus to look at this motion maybe on another day when we don't have witnesses here. Yeah. That's my argument, Mr. Yeah. Okay, so my point that I would like to make.
I'm sure they'll be thrilled with watching this debate, so carry on. With that, Ms. Lalonde, on the substance of the motion.
So I'm hoping that actually we can go back to our witnesses because they're here, and as we saw some very relevant questions by all of us, I think there is a merit to hear the decision that was made on our calendars to go forward. When I look at this motion, and thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Chair, because I do value the importance of having possibly a new list or looking at our list on our housing study. Indeed, very relevant. I just found this always entertaining, if I can say, that we are always conflicting ourselves or confronting ourselves with an ability to hear senior ranking officials who come and take their time out of a busy day to come and to listen to us and to give us an explanation of what we want. So certainly the motion on the premises sounds interesting. We are studying housing. I hope, Mr. Chair, that we'll go back to housing and complete that study. I don't know if the value of what Mr. Bazan is proposing can all be agreed upon today. I think there's merit on certain witnesses to be expanded. He brought his list of witnesses when he proposes his own study. So looking at this motion, there would be potential amendment that we would make. My question is, could we look at this another day and continue to listen to our witnesses on the Indo-Pacific? If this is not something that the committee is willing to consider, then I would say, yes, Mr. Chair, you would have to release, unfortunately, our witnesses, and then we will speak for a very long time together to amend this wonderful motion.
So I don't, unless I'm reading the committee wrong, I don't see any appetite to adjourn this debate, in which case, or to release the witnesses. So next one up would be Mr. Kelly.
Well, thank you, and you know, as I said, I wondered whether she might move to adjourn debate if that's what she really wanted to do, but the motion has tremendous merit, and I think it's extraordinarily relevant to, in particular, many of the MPs at this table for a variety of reasons, including the Halifax members, including other members that have raised this issue. So I'll let the floor go now in hopes that we may just come to a vote, approve this, and then we can resume our questions of the witnesses.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. I have Madame Lambropoulos, Madame Matheson, Madame Gallant, and Mr. Bazan. And Ms.
Thank you.
So, Madame Lambropoulos.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, you know, I agree with parts of the motion. Of course, it is an extremely important issue, and nobody who is a member of the CAF should be experiencing homelessness. Let's just get that out there. And if there are people who are experiencing that, then we absolutely need to look at this issue. I just wish that the member did not raise it in such a partisan matter. I really don't believe that the Prime Minister has anything to do with the situation. I know that there is our economy is struggling worldwide, and it's due to geopolitical reasons. So, I can't support it the way that it's written, obviously, but I would be happy to see it amended so that we can still take care of the issue of the CAF members who are experiencing homelessness, as that in particular is something that we should look at and find a solution for.
Matheson.
Chair, and I too am disappointed that we won't have additional time to speak to the witnesses, even after experiencing quite the derogation from my colleagues. I did have further questions in terms of security status in around the world. Regarding the motion, I too am okay with parts of it. I certainly am unsure and would love to have a further discussion about this at our subcommittee, where this actually belongs, to maybe expand the motion that we are currently studying, the study that we have on housing, to include some of these witnesses. That would be absolutely acceptable to me. I would question, however, the members' tactics continually. That seems to be a continuation from last year. Unfortunately, the new year hasn't brought anything new in that. I would also question the member who brought this forward, understanding he has the best of intentions. However, during the discussions of a 106.4, the honourable member from the Bloc and myself suggested that we put forward an all-opposition letter to the minister directly, and asked the honourable member to sign on to said letter, of which he delayed and then refused. So if he truly wanted all answers, then maybe he could have signed on to that letter. But if this is the tactic that he wishes to get in terms of a clip that he can use, then so be it. And I hope that we can continue this conversation in subcommittee again where it belongs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Gallant.
All that's in this motion is asking for extra witnesses. Many times we have the clerk who's unable to get the witnesses for a given time, and this furnishes him with a list of extra witnesses. So we're asking in advance, should there be a blank, a hole where we have to cancel committee because we don't have witnesses. Now, if they want to deny the fact that what is going on, the homelessness in the military, that and be denialist, that's quite something else. But let's get the witnesses on the list. Call the question.
I've had a request to call the questions before I hear from the. Do you want to call the question? Okay. Mr. Brizan.
Okay. So just in response to some of the comments that have been made, first of all, national defense, Canadian Armed Forces housing, and compensation for our serving members are all the responsibility of this government under Justin Trudeau. So the out of control housing crisis, the hyperinflation that we're seeing, the housing prices in Canada, especially in places like Halifax, Toronto, and Vancouver, Victoria, are skyrocketed because of that's been proven to be created by this Liberal government and their policies. We need to address this now. And the reason I never signed on to a letter, because all it does is give time for the minister to maybe respond in the next 6 months. This is a crisis that's happening today. We've got witnesses that have appeared in front of the Nova Scotia legislature that said that there are members who are serving on, that are living in tents, couch surfing, and putting themselves in harm's way. I can't believe that we would sit around this table and try to delay this and not bring this forward now and expand our study and have these witnesses appear so that we can further drill down and make sure that we get answers sooner than later and keep putting our members of the forces at risk.
I have Normandine, Fisher, Fillmore, and Lalonde. Madame Normandine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to issue some apologies to our witnesses for this unfortunate event. I had, of course, one of the witnesses that I had more questions for on the essence or the grounds behind this motion. I agree that we need to hear from these witnesses, even though I may not be in agreement with the entire motion because I do find it highly or overly partisan. But quickly, I wanted to say that this is the kind of thing that the subcommittee should address. This might not be the approach that the motioners would like to see, but that would be my recommendation, that we address this issue in the subcommittee so that we could avoid in the future wasting any time at this committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And we all have agreed that the topic of housing is hugely important, which is why when the Conservatives under James moved a motion to study housing, we agreed, and we're in the middle of a housing study right now. Bring these topics up during our housing report. Ask for extra meetings. The committee has been very, very supportive of your request for a housing study. We think about the exorbitant costs that, people may have, and then we see the Conservatives vote against, in a 30-hour marathon, vote against an increase in pay for our DND members. Let's have those conversations. This is something that we can do within the study that you've asked us to do, that we are currently doing. I'm all for talking about these important issues. We can do them within the study that we're on now.
Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks, Chair. I want to just underline what Ms. Lambropoulos said. Homelessness is unacceptable for anybody. I think that everyone on this committee and every one of us in this room probably carry a specific sensitivity for those in uniform that are homeless. At DND Halifax that Mr. Bazan has raised, there are 10,000 CAF members, and 3/4 of those are members who serve in uniform. And it is, I would say, understandable that those numbers are reflected in the 200 or 300 or so folks that are living rough in Halifax right now. It's just sort of statistically going to happen. But it doesn't mean that it's at all acceptable. We have Halifax in particular is experiencing this housing crisis in a way that is more acute perhaps than some other places, for the reason that our city has been the fastest growing population-wise city in the country for a couple of years. We are surprised by this growth in a way. We're a victim of our own success. But the growth in housing has not been able to keep up with this sudden explosion in population. So I'm highlighting this because it's specifically a Halifax thing relative to some of the other cities. But there are many, many efforts underway by 3 orders of government to solve this in Halifax. The way that this order of government can best address this is through the housing study that this committee has already undertaken. And I don't understand why we need to stand for people making political hay out of what is a tragic situation when we already have a study underway to address the very issues that you raise. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I move to adjourn debate on this question.
I'll call the vote.
Absolutely. Mr. Fisher? Yes. Madame Lambropoulos?
Yes.
Madame Lalonde?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore? Yes. Mr. Bazan?
No.
Ms. Kramp-Nyman?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Ms. Gallant?
So to be clear, we're voting to close down the debate, not to vote against the motion to study homelessness and add some witnesses.
To adjourn debate.
I'm opposed then.
Thank you. Madame Normandin?
No.
And Ms. Matheson?
Yes.
So 6 to 5.
Okay, that closes the debate. We have 6 minutes left. And I don't see that there's anything that can be accomplished that's useful in 6 minutes. I suppose we could go back to the speaking order, and that would give Mr. Collins 5 minutes. But may I say, colleagues, that my anticipation is on Wednesday that we will hear from Brookings for the first hour, and then we are to consider our report on our trip to Europe last summer, which I don't anticipate to be controversial. And it may be that we could carve out a bit of time to deal with this issue and others as to where we want to go for the next few weeks and months. Anyways, I would encourage you to not only speak to each other, but to speak to the chairs so that we can possibly do this in a collegial way as opposed to other ways. With that, Mr. Collins, you have final 5 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. First question to Major General Smith. You emphasized in your opening the importance of partnerships. You talked about Canada being a reliable partner. You used words like collaboration and cooperation. I'm interested on your take on our what role the U.S. plays in terms of that partnership and fulfilling our goals and objectives in the region as part of the plan.
Mr. Chair, U.S. is an important partner, obviously the biggest partner in the region, and we do a lot with them. We can talk about the Taiwan Strait transits. Those are done with the United States of America. So we're doing a lot in the region, and the United States is a very important part of that.
And if I could then just to follow up on that, former President Trump has, he has some very strong opinions about NATO and the partnerships and alliances that have been formed historically over the last several decades. And he's pulled out some of those quotes and some of those opinions again in his quest to become the Republican candidate for the presidential election in the U.S. this year. What do we do as one of as a partner of the U.S. and part of that alliance? What do we do to prepare for the eventual return or possible return of President Trump and those opinions, and by extension, policies that facilitate and accommodate the same opinions?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to emphasize the fact that we work very actively with the U.S. in the region, and this IPS shows Canada doing some really good things in the region. I think, again, first year, not to get too celebratory about it, but I think we're doing good work, and we're showing Canada's effort in the region to reinforce the international rules-based order. Beyond that, U.S. is one ally in the region. I talked about ASEAN and ADMM+. Those are the kind of organizations we're really trying to do more with, and that will equally better embed us in the region and show what we do to contribute.
I think at this point, Mr. Chair, I'd cede the rest of my time to Ms. Matheson.
So are we splitting between Ms. Matheson and Madame Normandy?
I can try and do it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So in terms of what happened during that whole surveillance balloon ordeal last year, we know that that increased tensions and there was a lot going on. How can Canada ensure to continue that key communication channel to protect our commercial assets, but our military assets within the Indo-Pacific, despite the cutting of some of those communication cables and ties that happened, as an example, between the U.S. and China at that period of time?
Mr. Chair, I'll start, then maybe I'll throw over to my global affairs colleagues. So we have a line of communication here in Ottawa. It's with the defense attaché. I'm the guy that gets to do that. We're trying to get past just demarches, which is just speaking angrily at each other, to reestablish relationships, and we're looking at that now. How can we get to a more baseline discussion? As you know, we haven't not done exercises or military cooperation with the People's Republic of China and the PLA since 2018. We're taking a look, but we have to do that with our greater partners across government.
So I'd like to give my rest of my time to Ms. Namada, if there's any time.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. A quick question. We know that in the Indo-Pacific strategy, there is a goal of strengthening student exchanges in this people-to-people connection. But we've heard an announcement that there would be a cap on visas for foreign students. How would that all work together?
So, indeed, the Indo-Pacific Strategy foresees a number of initiatives to reinforce collaboration on academic matters, including through scholarships. The commitment under the Indo-Pacific Strategy with respect to investing in people and connecting people is to strengthen our ability to recruit and retain high-potential students. And I think I can't speak specifically to the recent announcement. I think we have colleagues at IRCC who are able to do that. But what I can say is that the principles behind the Indo-Pacific Strategy remain. We are still committed to strengthening Canada's international student program through the Indo-Pacific Strategy, which commits to recruiting and retaining high potential students. So we continue to be committed to do that, and we will work with our colleagues at Immigration and Refugees Citizenship Canada to continue to pursue that.
You have 20 seconds. All right. All right, with that, I just want to thank the witnesses for their attendance and for the purposes of collegiality, which seems to have not got off to a good start just so far. Wednesday, we have the military housing SRVA confirmed, and then the second hour we deal with the report, and possibly members could talk to us about other things they might wish to do. February 5th, more military housing. Defense Ombudsman has been confirmed, and FRCs have been invited. Then we'd switch to the transparency report on May 7th, February 7th, February 12th, and February 14th. And then February 26th, we'd switch to consulting services. May I say that the minister has been invited for the February 7th meeting. Not confirmed, but invited. So with that, I thank you for your appearance, and I hope to see you again sooner rather than later. What we're talking about here is extraordinarily important, and even since we adjourned prior to Christmas, and now the entire world environment has been shaken. And I think this committee needs to be on top of it as much as possible. So I'm rather hoping colleagues will see fit to invite you back, but not just to talk about this issue, but other areas of conflict around the world, because your services are being called upon more and more and more, and I don't see a quick end to this. So again, thank you for your service, thank you for your appearance, and thank you for your patience. Meeting adjourned.
you.